I'm a female, and I was 23 at the time of this story. These events took place in 2010, and I finally thought it was time to share the story of the horrifying events I went through with the demon in the basement. At the time, I had been on the lookout for a new place to live, as my roommate had a cat, and I could no longer deal with my allergies. When I moved in with her, I was living in a dingy motel room, so having a roommate in a proper house was a serious upgrade. I thought the cat wouldn't be too much of an issue, but it was not to be. Being an animal lover, I could never even think about suggesting to someone to get rid of a beloved pet, so I opted to move out instead. I had been searching for a new place for a few weeks, when I came across an ad on Craigslist describing a room for rent on a waterfront property. It was surprisingly affordable, and I was very intrigued. There were no photos on the ad, but the address was pretty nearby, so I took a drive over to the place to take a look at the property. It was beautiful. It definitely looked lived in and well maintained, so I called the number on the ad later that day to make an inquiry. This is when I first came across Crazy Patty. At first, she seemed extremely friendly over the phone. We laughed and joked and got along very well. She said she would be delighted to meet me and to come around any time to view the property and the room for rent, so I made an appointment for the next day. I pulled up in the driveway and was greeted by Patty waving warmly at me from the front porch. She was a middle-aged woman in her 40s and had a kind of hippie-ish clothing style. She wore thick glasses and had long, frizzy brown hair. She was shorter than me by a couple of inches and spoke in a kind of nasally baby voice. Now, before I continue, I would like to give a little background on the women of my family. We are all gifted in the spiritual realm. The gift can be traced back to my great-great-grandmother, who could read tea leaves. She was extremely gifted and did readings for her entire life, until one day she finished her tea and read her son's death. Needless to say, she never read tea leaves again. Since then, the women on my mother's side have inherited some kind of special gift, whether it's clairvoyance, clairsentience, or something of that nature. Funnily enough, no one since my great-great-grandmother has had the ability to read tea leaves. I was lucky, or unlucky enough to be clairvoyant, meaning I could see, hear, and even smell things from the spirit world. These things happened very rarely to me, and at this point, I just considered my abilities a bit of an annoying quirk, and had not yet accepted them as part of who I am. Even though I was aware of my gifts and the spirit world, I was still a very skeptical person, and I always tried and even wanted to find rational explanations for things before I came to any conclusion about any kind of spiritual activity. Before these events, I had never experienced any kind of malevolent or demonic being. Since my phone conversation with Patty had gone so well, I was expecting us to get along just fine in real life. As I walked up the stairs of the porch to shake her hand, I immediately noticed her eyes. I can't fully explain how they looked, only that they were off. She said how nice it was to meet me and shook my hand. I immediately got icy chills down my spine. I managed to smile and said that it was great to meet her too. She took me inside and, to be fair, the house was beautiful. It had a massive living room with huge skylights, and there were lush plants everywhere. The kitchen was ultra-modern and sparkling clean. There was also a huge 2-story deck out back, fully kitted out with furniture, a bar and a fire pit. The deck opened onto a private beach on a lake, and I immediately fell in love with the house. Patty took me downstairs to the finished basement, where the room for rent was. The basement consisted of 4 rooms, a large living room with a pool table, a bathroom, a smaller living room, and a bedroom. The rooms for rent were the bedroom and the smaller living room. Apart from being a little dark and without a huge amount of light, the rooms for rent were lovely. They were clean and fully furnished. Patty was extremely nice to me, and she seemed very excited to show me around. But something still seemed off about her. Despite the uneasiness I felt, I decided that I loved the house, and the next day we went through all the relevant paperwork. I paid my deposit, and before you knew it, I was all moved in. At the time, I had no family where I was living. One side of my family were in Europe, where I had just moved from at the beginning of summer, or all the way down on the southern part of the US. So I was feeling a little bit lonely and optimistic. Patty worked during the day, and I worked at night at a bar, so we rarely saw each other. At first, this arrangement was perfect, and I was settling in nicely. I had no issues, until one night about a week in, I decided to cook dinner myself. I had a night off, my first since moving in with Patty, and was dying to use the gorgeous kitchen. Growing up, I was always taught to clean as I go, so I just did that. I heard Patty's key in the front door and greeted her as she walked into the kitchen. My smile faltered as I saw the expression on her face. She looked enraged and yelled at me and asked what the hell I was doing. Her brow was furrowed, her lips were pulled back in a snarl. I was completely shocked, and my body froze for a moment before I answered shakily that I was just cooking dinner. I tried to appease her by offering some, but she swelled like an angry toad and screamed that I had destroyed her kitchen. Now my dinner was fairly simple. I had been cleaning as I went along. The only thing that was dirty was one pan, which was already soaking in soapy water. I explained that I obviously had every intention of cleaning it up, but she screeched again, stomped down the hall and slammed her bedroom door. I quickly cleaned up everything and made sure the place was spotless before taking my plate down to my bedroom and eating down there so I didn't run into her again. After that, things got worse. Patty was no longer friendly to me and looked at me like I was just some gross insect that she longed to squash. I tried desperately to look for somewhere else to live, but I lived in a tourist area and it was a seasonal town. It was coming into winter and many businesses had shut down and residents moved out of state. I could find nowhere else to rent that I could afford. I even contacted my old roommate, but because of a sudden family issue, she moved back in with her parents, and I kept looking for weeks but found nothing. As the weeks went by, it became apparent that Patty didn't want me there. She wanted no trace of a roommate in her house. She wanted to collect the money, and that was it. I tried to stay out of her way by doing my household chores and emerging from the basement when she was out of the house. On my nights off, I went into work to eat dinner, so I didn't need to use the kitchen. I made sure only to buy microwave dinners for the nights I couldn't afford to eat out, and every time I had to come upstairs and Patty was there, I would be met with her intense glare, with those eyes that continued to be off somehow. At this point, my living situation had started to affect me physically. I was constantly exhausted, my skin was paler, and I became very skittish. It was after this change in me started to take hold that things in the basement started happening. Things would go missing and then turn up. At first, I just put this down to forgetfulness, which I am prone to. But one day something happened that made me incredibly uneasy. See, I always kept my work shoes in a specific spot when I came downstairs. I had been called in for a day shift last minute and was getting my uniform on, and on my way out I went to grab my shoes, but they weren't there. Now, this was something I was not forgetful about. I always kept my shoes in this specific spot because Patty didn't want me dirtying up the carpet. I went upstairs to check and see if I had left them up there, and I hadn't. I looked everywhere for them and couldn't find them anywhere. I wouldn't put it past Patty to do something mean like take my shoes, and I went back downstairs to grab a different pair of shoes, only to stop dead in my tracks. Right there in their normal spot were my shoes. My heart leapt out my chest. What was going on? I knew I was forgetful at times, but they definitely weren't there a minute ago, were they? There had to be an explanation. Patty was at work, so I knew it wasn't her, and it was at that moment that a thought crept into my mind. Was there someone else in the house? Terrified, I grabbed my shoes and ran upstairs. I grabbed my keys and immediately left the house, locking the door behind me. I wondered if I should call the police. Or what would I tell them? That I found my work shoes right where I left them? I thought about telling Patty, but the thought of telling her that something had bothered me like that would only give her ammunition to torment me further. So I didn't tell anyone. After work, I came home to Patty eating her dinner and a mess in the kitchen. Luckily, I had the foresight to grab some food to go from the bar, so I crept in as quietly as possible and just went downstairs to eat as I always did. I turned on the light in my room, and for a split second I thought I had seen a dark figure in the far corner. I did a double take, my heart pounding. I had to be going nuts. The stress of this place was starting to make me hallucinate. Satisfied, but still a little uneasy with my explanation, I turned on my TV and began to eat my dinner. As I ate, I was still convinced I saw flutters of movement coming from that corner of the room, just out of my sight. But every time I looked, there'd be nothing. This mysterious figure would start making regular appearances out of the corner of my eye, but again when I tried looking, there would be nothing there. I thought I was losing my mind, and became even more withdrawn. It was after a few months of this happening that the dreams started. I would be having a perfectly normal dream when all of a sudden, I would have the feeling of being strangled by a faceless man. I would be fighting him off, and I would always wake myself up by screaming. I would wake up sweating, and my heart would be pounding. The worst part was, my throat would be sore, and I never knew if I had really been screaming or not. I would like to think that if I was, Patty would run down, but that was unlikely. I would start out having these dreams about once or twice a month. Then as it came closer into the fall of the following year, they started happening more regularly. Once a week, twice a week, every other day. I was feeling completely broken down mentally, emotionally, and physically. I was a shell of my former self. At this point, you're probably wondering why I stayed at Crazy Patty's house for as long as I did. Well, for those of you who have never experienced emotional and mental abuse, consider yourself lucky. It is extremely powerful. Patty used a variety of techniques including manipulation, intimidation, and gaslighting to ensure I stayed where I was. She hated me there, but she wanted the money. She literally had to convince me I wouldn't find anywhere else as nice as her place for the price I was paying, and that no one would put up with me anyway. Up until this point, I had not considered my unsettling experiences at Patty's house to be demonic. I had put them all down to a side effect of being so stressed out and beaten down. Until one night, as usual, I had eaten my dinner out of a to-go box in my bedroom. I was sitting on my bed with my laptop in my lap. I had been watching some funny videos online when all of a sudden, I couldn't take a breath. It felt like my chest was being constricted by an invisible vice grip. I went to move my hands up to my throat to check for a swelling or something, but couldn't move my arms. I was completely paralyzed. It was then that I finally saw the figure in a corner. Its face was covered with a hood, but it lifted its head just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face. Its eyes were huge and bulbous, much like the milky, pupilless eyes of an anglerfish. It had no other features except for those eyes and that smile, that toothy smile full of uneven and rotten teeth. A smile that extended beyond the boundaries of its face. Think of Fred from that seriously creepy episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog. My heart stopped, and as soon as I saw this figure full on, it vanished. I finally understood what was happening. I was being attacked. Somehow, I fought the pressure, and it subsided. This ordeal couldn't have lasted for longer than 10 seconds or so, but it felt like much longer. I was finally able to draw a breath and lay on my bed, panting, as if I had just been drowning. I immediately jumped up and dug into my junk drawer and found a few white candles, some sage, and a few crystals. I lit the white candles for protection, I lit the sage to purify the room, and kept my crystals in my hand. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night. After this incident, I continued to keep sage lighting at all times when I was in the room awake, and things settled down for a while. It wasn't until Halloween night that the crescendo of my experience peaked. Cliché, I know, but think about it. It was and still is believed that the veil to the spirit world is at its thinnest on All Hallows Eve, making it easier for spirits to enter our world. I had been working that night and gotten home around 1 a.m. exhausted. I fell right to sleep, only to get that strange sensation some hours later. But this time it felt different and more pronounced. In my dream, the entity that was attacking me had grabbed me by the throat. In the past, I had not seen its face while it was doing this. I finally got a full-on view of its face. I could see the cracks on its rotten teeth. I could see the pale blood vessels in its grotesque eyes, and I could smell its rotten breath. I felt a scream coming, but couldn't get it out. In my dream, I fought and fought, desperately trying to escape its grasp. It picked me up by the throat and slammed me into the wall behind me. I kept fighting with all my might until I finally woke up. I was sweating and panting and tears were streaming down my face. I looked at the clock. It was only 3 a.m. But as soon as I looked at the clock, my blood froze in my veins. Not because it was 3 a.m., the traditional witching hour, but it was then I realized that I was not laying in my bed. I was sitting up against the wall. I leaped out of bed and ran into the bathroom, afraid I was going to be sick. Luckily, my stomach held, and I ended up splashing some cold water on my face. It was only when I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror that I had to stifle a scream. My neck was bruised and scratched, like I had been strangled. Without even thinking about how late it was, I called my boss in absolute hysterics. The bar I worked at was attached to a hotel, and I pleaded with him to let me sleep in one of the rooms that night. He did, and I decided then and there that I would be moving out of Crazy Patty's house. I arrived back the next day to pack up what few belongings I had. After I had everything all packed up, I noticed her bedroom door was open. This was highly unusual, as she always kept it locked when I wasn't there. Thinking maybe her car was at the shop and she was there, I went over to tell her I was leaving, but she wasn't in there. I went to close the door when something on the floor caught my eye. Now normally it's out of character for me to snoop in someone else's room, but something in my gut told me to check out what it was that caught my eye. On the floor was a planchette that had been broken in half, with the glass shattered all over the floor. The glint of the glass is what caught my eye, and on the other side of the room was a Ouija board. It finally clicked that it had been Patty that had sent this entity on me. I stormed out. I was fiddling with my house keys, trying to get it off my keychain to leave it on the counter with a note that I had left her, when I noticed movement on the outside deck. I looked up and was absolutely horrified to see Patty standing on the other side of the glass door, staring at me completely naked. She had her hands on the glass and seemed to be pressing her face right against it. It was then I noticed her eyes, which had always been off to me, and I finally understood why. Instead of her usual slightly off eyes staring back at me, They looked more like the milky bulbous eyes of the entity. I quickly turned around, ran to my car and tore out the driveway, never to return. Things got better after that. My anxiety subsided, my face filled out again, and I started to be a lot more social. After a few weeks, I moved into an apartment with 2 girls I worked with and got along very well with, and never saw Crazy Patty again. As of telling this story, almost 12 years have passed. I am no longer easily beaten down by manipulation tactics. I have become a lot more assertive and will not tolerate any attempt to deceive or manipulate me. I have also been practicing white magic in the form of plants and cooking, and have embraced my clairvoyance as part of who I am. I am happy to say that I have never experienced anything like I did at Crazy Patty's house. If I even get a whiff of negative entity, I get the hell out and dodge stat. All in all, I am a much healthier, stronger and happier person than I was all those years ago. But late at night, I will still sometimes get the horrifying image of Patty staring into my soul with those dead eyes of the demon in the basement. I am from a small town in Mexico, and for years I'd been fascinated by the spiritual world, ever since childhood, but it truly ignited 3 years ago when my dad passed away, plunging me into a depression so deep and relentless that nothing touched the darkness suffocating me day after day. That was when I tried ayahuasca, and it proved to be my breakthrough, as it surfaced buried pain that I needed to confront, when my deceased dad appeared vividly, guiding me through visions and revelations that kickstarted my path into constellations, kundalini magnets, chahama, and countless other therapies weaving into one another. It was a full year of intense personal and spiritual growth and discovery. I was 2 years into that personal work, at an immersive program in Brazil, when everything changed. Now, I went purely for the experience, but there was something about the horses during the constellation rituals that made me discover that my true calling was channeling energy directly through touch to help others heal at core levels. And I dove in headfirst, practicing on whoever sought relief, but each session drained me noticeably because clients carried dark and dense energies that I tried to purify or expel, and unknowingly, I let my guard down. And I believe it was at that time that a dark entity attached itself to me. The attacks began subtly just after. I sank into a profound depression without reason, face wasting away. I was lumpy, completely depleted of energy, wanting only to cry or disappear, and disconnect from life itself like a walking shadow. Friends noticed my dimmed spark, the constant smile and eagerness to heal replaced by withdrawal, while my young daughters simply thought that Mum was exhausted when I refused outings or even playtime with them, always claiming fatigue had gotten the better of me. It wasn't until a friend of mine, a Kabbalist practitioner, came over and confirmed it to me bluntly, that a dark energy, a demon, had attached to me. It was sucking my vitality away methodically, as they do with unprotected lightworkers disrupting their domain. The following happened on December 26th at 3 a.m., the day my life changed forever. One of my 2 dogs, the one I'd just adopted who always curled beside me, began barking restlessly downstairs, pacing with agitated energy that was already setting my frayed nerves on end. That was when I heard the TV in the living room inexplicably flick on by itself, despite me being utterly alone in the house, with every door locked tight and no entry possible. I stumbled down into the dimness to switch it off, heart pounding at the inexplicable nature of the event, and tried to go back to sleep. The next day, on the 27th, I was still drained, not mere tiredness, but profound sadness, an indefinable heaviness like rot seeping into my bones. The housekeeper arrived for her routine, and we chatted over breakfast as she prepared to lift my spirits. I was desperate to shift the energy, so I reached for my censer and herbs that I kept for smudging and cleansing, convinced low vibrations demanded a ritual purge, alongside a tiny jar of gunpowder from a recent event. I pulled out the tiniest pinch for sparking a purifying flame against lingering bad vibes, a practice I'd done flawlessly, countless times without incident. I did this with my right hand, which was the dominant channel where healing energy pulsed strongest, even now. I scooped the minuscule grains, sprinkling them precisely onto the glowing copal. When it detonated catastrophically and beyond all reason, ripping my hand and wrist clean off in a blinding flash, while shrapnel shredded half my right side with holes across my legs and torso, blood gushing everywhere as my arm dangled uselessly amid screams I barely registered. I was miraculously conscious through the hellish pain. I staggered to the gate, opening it wildly for neighbors as they swarmed. There was a nurse among them who fashioned a desperate tourniquet to stem the hemorrhage. I survived every tortuous second, knowing immediately this was targeted demonic retaliation for encroaching on dark domains through my cleansing rituals. I was then rushed to a local hospital and transferred to a more specialized unit in Mexico City to advanced care, my small town lacking trauma resources. I lost my hand and the wrist in the blast, the doctors having to amputate to save my life. As you can imagine, it was an extremely difficult time in my life. But to add insult to injury, the neighbors in my small town expressed the opinion that what I was doing was nothing short of witchcraft, and said that what I faced was divine wrath for meddling in such affairs. This devastation cost me friends and neighbors who I once considered as loving, caring folk. But with the continued support of my family and remaining friends, I've pushed through and recovered a lot quicker than any medic anticipated. We focused intensely on my own purification, and I am glad to say that I believe the dark entity that attached itself to me has been purged. I'm not going to let the loss of the limb get in the way of my work in helping others. This happened 20 years ago now. I was newly pregnant with my second child, and we were moving into a rental house. When we toured the house, the landlord had converted the basement of the house into an illegal apartment. Whatever, I'm in my early 20s and don't care. Then he proceeds to tell us how the basement had demonic stuff sprayed all over the walls and floors when they were renovating. Weird, sure, but I'm still not fazed. We move in and lived there for 5 months without incident. Never even thought about what the landlord told us. Then I got a call from a cousin of mine. He wanted to move back to the state I live in and asked if he could temporarily stay with us. I said it was no issue. We had a spare bedroom and could use a few extra $100 a month. Once he arrives, he has no money to buy what he needs for his new job, so we supply him and tell him he can pay us back with his first check. 2 weeks go by, and we go grocery shopping and fill the house for the month. We could budget around $400 a month, and that was all we had. Sounds ridiculously low now, but again, it was 20 years ago when we made it last. The next day, we decided to go visit my dad. I'm around 6 months pregnant now, and when we get there, he has all his horses up by the barn grooming them. And when he finished with my favorite one, I saddle him up for a few rides. I was just about to pull my oldest up to go along with me, and for some reason changed my mind at the last minute. The horse was then stung in the behind, and he took off like a bat out of hell with me atop. He's refusing to stop. He was a barrel jumper and had a 30-foot stride, and we were going head-on with a car until the very last second, where he veers left, jumps a massive boulder, and at that point I curl into the fetal position, cradling my stomach and bail. Thankfully, the car we were going at head-on was a paramedic coming home from his shift. I'm loaded into an ambulance and transported to the hospital. Me and the baby are just fine, but my eye is swollen shut, and the horse stepped on my arm. My obstetrician decides to keep me for 5 days while my eye heals and to monitor the baby. My kid's dad and my youngest stayed for 2 days with me, and then we had a friend take my oldest, so she wasn't stuck at the hospital. Day 5, I go home on pain meds for my back and arm to discover not only my cousin has eaten and or taken every single grocery we had in the house, but he also moved back home without saying a word or paying us back any rent. My friend decided she was going to stay with us a few days to help me since I couldn't really move well. She needed blankets, and I tell her to go into the back bedroom, which was my cousin's room, and grab some out of the closet. She walks back in there and immediately goes, "Nope, not going in there, feels weird." So I waddle myself back there and grab them for her, and I'm physically stopped on the door, like quite literally I couldn't step foot in the room, like a barrier was in the doorway. I nope myself back to the room and tell her she can sleep in my bed with me. The next day I go to the room again, and I can walk in and grab the blankets I need, but it feels so heavy in there, like I'm being watched. She leaves after 2 days and I'm in bed. My kid's dad works 3rd shift, so it's just me and my 2-year-old at home. As me and her were laying in my bed that night, I saw a lady in a long, white, flowy gown walk past my bedroom door, and then back down the hall again. I've seen ghosts for my entire life, and I don't really think much of it. This continues for a few nights, but she starts pacing back and forth in front of the bedroom door. Then she starts slowly moving closer and closer as each night goes on, pacing back and forth. By the 5th night, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion of being awake, only to wake up startled to her standing next to my bed, staring down at me. I'm in full panic mode. My 2-year-old is asleep next to me and can't move or speak. Then she just sits on my bed, but not just on my bed, but like on me, and then lays down like she was trying to take over my body. I'm finally able to scream, "Get out, you're not welcome here, in the name of Jesus, get out." I scream it a few times over and over, and then all of a sudden her ghost lifts up out of me and is sucked out through my window. I never saw or felt her again. We lived there for 6 more months after that, but I wonder, could it be something that was attached to my cousin when he came and left her behind? Or from the demonic worship that happened in the basement prior to our landlord purchasing the house? All things to ponder. I've had cats all my life. When I was 7, my mum's cat TC and Bones suddenly passed away. It was sad because my mum was sad, but I didn't understand death. My brothers were little hellions, and the 3 of us got into trouble with the law a few times back then. There was this old house on the corner of our development. It may have been the first house built there, an old colonial farmhouse. My brother and their friends had this grand idea to explore the condemned building, and I was afraid and didn't want to be left out. So I followed them inside. James and Luke ran upstairs exploring the bedroom, and I stayed near the front door in what I think may have been the living room. There were belongings which were old and dusty, covered in layers of build-up, and it reeked of soil and mothballs. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang above me, and then James yelled Luke's name. Jimmy and Jake, twins, my brother's friends, were up there too, and I was freaking out. My heart was pounding, the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up, and electric static surged all over me. I was frozen. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And that's when I saw a tall man wearing a tattered trench coat, and he had a top hat like President Lincoln. His face was elongated, with eyes so demonic I could feel the heat in the room. Somehow a fire was started. It had to have been Jimmy or Jake. My brothers swear they didn't set the fire, and it wasn't before long that my brothers, Jimmy and Jake, found their way outside. Panic forced them to forget I was still in. I could see the fire blazing at the top of the stairs and started screaming, still unable to move as this figure began stepping towards me. I could hear Luke calling my name. I screamed for him to help me, but he didn't come. Instead, something else. I don't know where it came from, if it lived in that house, or if it was a local. A cat. A cat ran past me, and the thing of the man disappeared. It felt like this incredible weight was lifted and I could move again. I ran outside, meeting up with my brothers before we all ran away and sirens screamed in approach. We watched that house burn down. I don't know what happened to the cat. I would have taken it home. I did that sort of thing a lot when I was younger. Not long after that, we got Rebel. He was a tuxedo cat and we had him for 8 years. We moved to a new town. Rebel was an indoor-outdoor cat mainly because he didn't get along with our Rotty bear. Soon, Rebel got sick from a fight and we had to put him down. A few weeks later, my parents left for a camping trip. Since James and Luke were young adults at this point and I was 13, they let me stay home. This was back in the 90s, and it wasn't uncommon to leave your teenagers home alone. I was vacuuming trying to keep my mind off Rebel, as he was my cat. There was a mirror fixed to the wall in the hallway. My dad couldn't remove it. I watched him hit it with an 8-pound hammer and it wouldn't break. He said whoever must have put it there surely used glue. And when I started vacuuming the hallway, I saw my reflection in it, and it startled me. I looked in the mirror for a second, and that's when I saw him. The trenchcoat man in the top hat. He wasn't in the mirror. He was in the reflection of the front bay window in the mirror. I snapped around, staring at the window, and Bear growled. I could feel it all again. The panic, the heat. Luckily, James had just pulled into the driveway. The lights from the car distorted the window, and it vanished. I have seen this thing 3 more times. Each time I didn't own a cat. Over the past 2 decades, I've adopted 6. Some cultures believe cats are guardians of the spirit world. They can sense and see things we can't, and if you're close to the cat, it will protect you from evil. I have shared this encounter with a few friends over the years. Some think it's just my trauma, and others don't really know what to say. It happened to me. I will never not own a cat. I won't take that chance, even if it is just trauma manifesting. I have always been sensitive to spiritual energies. As a kid and to this day, I can see wisps of spirit out of the corner of my eye and feel when a place has bad energy. This experience happened while I was living in an apartment alone in college back in 2017 to 18. This was also the peak of me being a Christian. I don't identify as one now, but I am very spiritual. I was asleep in my apartment, and while dreaming I started to get a bad feeling. I have had lucid dreams, so I can tell what a dream is and what is not. I woke up to see this old hunchbacked woman standing right next to my bed with her face over mine. Her face was about 1 foot from mine, but she had no jaw and was drooling while mumbling something. I then looked over to where my closet and bathroom were and saw this red-faced creature standing there. He looked a bit like Darth Maul from Star Wars, but he had long, black fingers that he was holding at his head by his temples. He was also flicking a pointed tongue at me. I quickly flipped on my lamp and they were gone. I don't think I was experiencing sleep paralysis because of how quickly I moved to turn the light on. It was like less than 30 seconds. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I told one of my friends and boyfriend at the time about what happened, and we decided to pray and anoint the apartment with oil. While my friend and ex were playing in the living room and kitchen, I started praying in my room. I had this awful feeling like I was being watched, and I decided to pray in the area where I saw the male creature. I immediately got this feeling in my throat and it started feeling like something was around my neck. I got scared and left the area. Then I got mad and very territorial about the apartment being my space and how it was not allowed to be there. So I got back in the space and prayed so hard I felt the feeling around my neck get lighter. I rejoined my friends in the living room and asked each of them to pray in the closet area separately, but I did not tell them what I felt. They both prayed and I asked them if they felt strange, and my friend said that she felt a tightness around her neck. But it wasn't scary, just weird, and my ex said he felt a tightness too, but it wasn't strong at all. After we prayed over the space, I never saw anything in the apartment again for the next year, and then I moved out. Ever since then, when I feel spirits or bad energy, I get very territorial still, and I'm so quick to tell it to get out, that it doesn't belong here. Before this happened, I had never seen Insidious. I was not allowed to watch scary movies as a kid because of the religion I grew up in. But as an adult, years after this experience, when I watched the red-faced demon pop up from behind the main character, I got a chill down my spine, because the thing I saw looked almost like the creature in the movie. And after I saw that scene, I turned the movie off. Growing up, I was always one of those weird kids who gravitated towards things most people avoided. I think especially anything involving the paranormal or unexplained. While other kids were scared of ghost stories, I sought them out. For my 12th birthday, my mum decided to lean into that interest and took me and my best friend at the time to tour the old asylum in a small, eerie town that had a reputation for being haunted. The place itself was actually pretty interesting from a historical standpoint. It was filled with old artifacts and medical equipment, and even the original clothing that patients had been made to wear. It's still open today as a tour site. Before we even get there though, my friend's mum planted an idea in our heads that stuck with me more than I expected. She told us that a psychic friend of hers had visited the asylum and claimed it was filled with dark entities that didn't want people there. At the time, I didn't take it seriously at all. If anything, it had made me more curious. So being a dumb, fearless preteen, I remember challenging whatever could be there, basically saying that if it were real, it should prove itself by hurting me or trying to possess me. I, of course, didn't believe either things would happen. Well, during the tour, a few odd things stood out, but nothing I couldn't rationalize in the moment. At one point, I heard what sounded like a young boy crying even though there weren't any children or male voices in our group. There were also a couple of footsteps that didn't seem to match ours, but I told myself that old buildings make odd noises all the time. What I couldn't ignore as easily, though, was how I started to feel physically. Out of nowhere, I became extremely nauseous, like it hit me hard all at once, and at the same time I felt this sharp burning sensation across my back, almost like something hot was being dragged across my skin repeatedly. It wasn't constant, but it happened enough to make me feel uncomfortable. But still I brushed it off as nerves, or perhaps being overwhelmed by the environment. At one point, we were in one of the main rooms, when the guide mentioned that people sometimes captured strange things in photos and encouraged us to take pictures just in case. Nearby, there was a bathroom that looked particularly unsettling, so I asked if I could step in quickly and take a mirror photo. I snapped the picture and left almost immediately because the group was already moving on, and I didn't even check it at the time. Overall, the tour itself ended up being kind of underwhelming. Aside from those small moments, nothing major happened, but I was more focused on how sick I started to feel. The nausea got worse the more the tour went on, and the burning sensation on my back didn't stop. By the end, I just wanted to leave, so we cut out a little early. The strange part is the moment we drove away from the asylum, I felt completely fine again, like the sickness had just switched off. That should have been reassuring, but instead, it made everything feel off. I had been to other haunted locations before, but none of them had affected me like that. When we got back home, I remember what I had said earlier about asking something to harm me, and half-jokingly asked my friend to check my back. The moment she lifted my shirt, her reaction changed instantly. She gasped and grabbed her phone to snap a picture. When I saw it, my stomach dropped. There were 3 long scratch marks across my back, deep enough that one of them had broken the skin. They weren't in a place I could have easily reached myself, and they didn't look like something I could have caused accidentally. There was also a separate mark that looked almost like a bite, roughly the width of 2 fingers. At that point, I started to panic. I had never taken the idea of anything supernatural seriously before, but I couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for what I was seeing. Then I remembered the photo I had taken in the bathroom, and I opened it expecting to see nothing. Instead, it showed me standing in front of the mirror, exactly as I remembered, but behind me, there was a dark, human-shaped figure that I knew wasn't there when I took the picture. It was tall, thin, and didn't have any clear features, just a shadow-like outline that stood out against the background. It was at that moment that everything really hit me hard. I don't have access to the photo anymore, which probably sounds convenient, but I know what I saw, and I know what was on my back. I've tried to come up with logical explanations over the years, and maybe there are some, but nothing has ever made full sense. I have no intention of ever going back. About 8 months ago, in August of 2023, my husband and I got back home. I headed inside the house before him, and as I walked in, I heard a deep, gravelly voice say my name. I thought it was my husband, so I called out his name since I didn't see him. He came in and asked, "What?" I told him I thought I heard him call my name, but he was firm that he never did. A month after that, we moved into a new home with a roommate. Within the first 2 months of living here, I heard a knock at the bathroom door while I was taking a shower, even though no one else was home. Later, I heard one of our cabinets closing when no one was in the room. A few days later, our roommate heard creaking upstairs while my husband and I were at work, and he was home alone. Then comes the scary part, whatever it was showing itself. After our roommate told us what happened, I got a bit creeped out and asked it to show itself, without my husband knowing. That night, my husband claimed he saw whatever it was wearing his clothes and taking the form of me, shaking and holding its head in pain. However, the image was fuzzy, almost like static and glitching at the end of the bed. He also has a vague memory where it wasn't taking the form of me as a body. It was a different body, but it still had my face. He heard me snoring next to him and realized whatever it wasn't me. His gut told him to look away and ignore it, even though he was scared. I also know that after the very first time my husband saw this, he didn't know I had asked it to show itself, so it wasn't a situation where I said it and my husband imagined it. At the time, we presumed this was some kind of mimic demon, according to the forums we looked up, and were advised to ignore it. After those experiences, we saged the place and used a cut-open lemon with salt to scare off or gauge the area. We don't really believe in ghosts or spirits or things like that, at least not until this. Things were quiet for maybe a month or 2. And then around January, our roommate heard more crawling upstairs, and we saged the place again. Then, our roommate heard it. It said his name. After he told us about this experience, we talked and determined it was likely the same thing that said my name several months prior, where it reached out with a deep and gravelly voice as soon as we were isolated, and we saged the hell out of that place. As time has gone on, our roommate has experienced the floor creaking when no one else is home, in the pattern of somebody slowly walking across the floor to one side of the house and then back to the other. I am a mostly strong follower of Jesus Christ, while my husband and roommate are also followers but not as strong as I am, in terms of how much trust we have in the Lord. I'm not trying to ride a high horse with any holier-than-thou bullcrap, but on another note that might be relevant, my husband told me after I started writing this that at one point about a month before the first encounter of my name being said, maybe May to July of 23, he had an experience where he put a cat/demonic costume that was handmade by a friend. This friend doesn't do anything spiritual or crazy, and the next day my husband said he felt an extremely dark power or energy that caused an overwhelming amount of dread. The night after writing this, when we had been talking to our family about it, my husband had a nightmare where two dark figures were chasing him. He woke up when I got up to get us more water, and I remember him asking if I was okay, and his face was completely panicked. He didn't want to talk about it, but then told me this morning about what he experienced. So who should we reach out to as a legit, valid source of help to get rid of whatever this may be? Both my husband and our roommate think it may be tied to me, given that I was the first point of contact. We don't know who to reach out to, as this is almost completely outside our understanding, and we don't have any paranormal experiences outside of this. Any help would be appreciated. This story didn't happen to me, but happened to my boss. He was around 10 to 14 years old, and his house is about 200 feet from their family business, with a small fielded valley in between. The businesses consisted of 2 warehouses and an office. The warehouses are at the edge of a field, and about 100 feet from that is the office. There is a mowed path that is from the house through the valley and ends by the end of the warehouse. He mentioned a graveyard being on the property, but he did not specify where. So now that the context is out of the way, let me get you to the story. All of the guys that work at the company meet up for breakfast around 7, and then go to work at 7:30. His dad decided not to go to breakfast this morning, so one of the guys was supposed to pick him up. It was a foggy, dewy day, so he couldn't see too far ahead of himself. He walked through the path to the warehouse, around the front that faces the office, and near the second warehouse. That was just beside the other warehouse. He was being picked up at the warehouse/office since this worker had a pretty loud truck. My boss waited for a while, and was aimlessly walking and kicking rocks when he noticed something weird by the office. Keep in mind, he would have seen this if he looked forward from the path. He tried to focus his vision to figure out what he was seeing. He said it looked like a big, dark figure that appeared to be sitting on an elevated throne. He thought it was a guy in a lawn chair on the top of a trailer. That would make more sense since the family business manufactured metal roofing, meaning the trailer would be necessary to pick up the material. And after looking at the figure for a few minutes, he noticed some dogs. There were 2 dogs that emerged from nowhere, sniffing around like they were trying to find something. His grandfather had dogs, however, that dog was a yellow lab. Even though he could not remember the color of the dogs, he does not recall them being yellow. And after seeing the dogs, he booked it. Since he was near the middle of the 2 warehouses, and the path being on the other side of these dogs, he ran around the other side of the building. The grass in this fielded valley is so long, so he had to run as fast as he could back to the house through thick, tall grass covered in morning dew. Once he made it back to the house, he ran inside, soaked from running in the field, and told his dad. He said, "Someone's at the office," to which his dad responded in a confused manner, "What?" My boss repeated himself and insisted that he look. When they made their way out of the office, nothing was there. With it being foggy and dewy outside, there should have been areas of the ground that looked different, but there were no footprints or paw prints or anything where the guy had allegedly been. So what did he see? I told him what I thought was the sighting of a demon or dark entity. He isn't worried about it. He never thought of it as being something scary. I mean, come on, a dark figure in a chair with dogs? I was getting chills the whole time he was telling me this. I felt sick. It scared the hell out of me. But what do you make of all of this? In October of last year, I had my first ever paranormal investigation with me and 2 friends, Sarah and Cameron. We thought it would be a good idea to go ghost hunting for the first time, so we booked a guided ghost hunting session at Chillingham Castle. Eventually the day came when we'd go to Chillingham Castle, and Sarah decided to buy a spirit board, thick as mints for doing that, before we went. And we used it in Cameron's room. For context, they were dating at that time. Cameron stayed out of it, but me and Sarah, like the stupid idiots we were, decided to use it. So we connected to a few spirits. But the main one we connected to was a spirit called Lyron. Now here's where it gets strange. We spoke to Lyron for a bit, and he told us he's a demon. I wasn't believing any of it, and I looked up Lyron and nothing came up. Anyway, we were done with the spirit board. Now we make our way to Chillingham Castle about 10 PM at night. I genuinely thought we were going to die with how Cameron was driving. Now, this was a guided ghost hunt. So there were us and about 15 other people there, and the guide comes in, explains the equipment, explains the spirits that roam the castle, and then we go into our first investigation. Since the actual basement was shut off because they said it was very unsafe for guests, they remade the basement just in a separate room on ground level. We headed in there and were given rods. Now I admit I was shaking, we all were. This was our first ever ghost hunt. All 3 of us are at the end, closest to the entrance of the room. The guide turns off the light and asks questions, and the rods were moving. But the scariest part of this first investigation was that I kept looking at the door, as if someone was standing right next to me the entire time. But after I kept looking at the door, I kept hearing voices closer to the door. But I wasn't the only one hearing them. Sarah did as well. We both freaked out, but we made it through. Also, me and Cameron got pushed on command, funnily enough, and no, it wasn't the guide or anything else. We could still just about see everyone in the darkness, and no one was in front of us when we were pushed. So that was cool. Freaked out, but cool. Anyway, on to the second investigation. The 3 of us were in the first room. We were in King James I room, I believe it was, and we walk in there and there's a table with 6 chairs and a random statue, and a room around the back of the room. Now, I'm looking away at this part, but I get nudged by Cameron, asking if I saw what he saw. And I'm like, no, because I was looking away. But both him and Sarah saw a hand move away from the statue. Now, I was turned away, so I can neither confirm nor deny if this was real. But they were certainly freaking out about it. So on to the investigation. On this one we're using the spirit box, the Estes method to be exact, and the music box. For the first 5 to 10 minutes everything was fine. We were getting normal responses to our questions, and then Sarah gets the spirit box because the 6 of us sat at the table, and were taking it in turns doing the Estes method. Well, not 10 seconds into getting the box back, she said clear as day, "Now there is a malevolent spirit called Tim or Timothy, but the guide said he's usually on the 2nd floor and not the top." So I looked at Cameron when the guide said this and I said, "Lyron's followed us, hasn't he?" as a joke. And as soon as I said this, the back room made a huge bang sound, and I thought I actually pooed myself. I guess that sort of confirmed that we might have accidentally summoned something. But there's an open top roof sort of like balcony above us, and I keep looking up because I think someone's watching from above. A few minutes go by, and I look to my left towards the door, and saw a shadow clear as day right in front of my eyes. I could tell it was a woman in a dress, and she probably walked around 5 feet in front of me. The guide saw it as well, and it wasn't him. He sat behind me, probably around 7 or 8 feet, and I would have heard him move, as he was sitting on a box that made noise whenever he moved, and it didn't. After seeing that, my mind was genuinely blown. But another few minutes go by and I get touched. Not touched like a hand on my shoulder or something like that, but I get poked 5 times in my lower back just above where my bum is, and I turn around. Again, it's not the guide, and I turned around so quick that if it was the guide, I would see him move back, but he's just chilling. And it ain't Cameron, as he sat right next to me as his arms were on the table the entire time. So this freaked me out, but nothing happened after that. So after about another 10 minutes we leave, and the final investigation was in, I believe, the chapel, and there's a back room there as well, which is said to be where Tim or Timothy, the malevolent or demonic spirit, is said to be. But I'll skip over this little bit, because it's a bit boring, but I will say this. So we're all chilling in the chapel doing the investigation, and we ask if Tim is here, and 2 seconds later a bang came from the back room in the chapel. But it wasn't like a bang as if something banged on the wall. It sounded like something was thrown. So with that concludes the story of my first ever investigation. If anyone has any recommendations of haunted places to go next, let me know. Perhaps I'll get successful again. About 7 months ago it was night, around 9 o'clock. I was in my room doing computer work, and my father shouted my name. I went to the living room, and we were having a normal conversation. I had my glasses on, their face looked normal. But when I took them off, I saw my mum and dad look like demons. I started crying loudly and running around, then I sat down calmly, put my glasses back on, and everything went back to normal. Then I sat down, calmly put my glasses back on, and everything looked normal again. Around 2 a.m. when we were sleeping, I heard voices in my head shouting loudly. They were fighting each other. Then I woke up. My mum and dad were asleep. They said everything was fine, but I knew it wasn't. I left my home at 3 a.m. because I knew something was off. I started running on the road. Then dogs started barking at me. Streetlights began blinking immediately, and I got very scared. I went back home and fell asleep. The next morning they took me to a psychiatrist. He said I needed to be admitted to a hospital. My family was with me, and suddenly, when the psychiatrist was speaking, I heard a shh voice in my head. I was terrified. What the hell is going on with me? I saw the shadow of 3 arms around me, hanging with me, and I started thinking in my head that nothing was real, and it was all in my head. But no. The next day around 2 a.m. my sister called me and asked how it was going and if I was scared. Then my sister's kids were shouting in the background, and I started panicking hard, switched off my phone and went to sleep. This happened for 7 nights straight. After that, I believed my family was possessed by a demonic force. I started praying to God and searching for God's picture on my phone. I was unable to look at it in the eye. They were looking at me with aggressive eyes. I showed the picture to my mum, and she was scared. I started wearing a rudashka, and suddenly I felt in my body a strong vibration, and then everything went back to normal. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed Ghost Week. I love doing this week-long bonanza of content, and if you enjoy it too, your thoughts and comments always go a long way down below. I would like to do this again, maybe not Ghost Week immediately, but I'm thinking, another week-long bonanza, maybe towards the end of April, towards the end of April. I think it'll be really fun. Give me your thoughts on what you'd like to see, and maybe I'll make it happen. I'd like to give a final thank you, as always, to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and for a small amount every month, they get some cool exclusive perks, and if you'd like to find out what they are, links to Patreon down below. But that's it from me, guys. I wish you all an amazing night, and I'll be back on Tuesday. Until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.